Thank you for having me back again. In a bit of serendipity, I was told just before I got on the stage that I really have to wait a minute. I have to kill about a minute or two of time, otherwise my slides might get out of sync and then the world will explode. But at the same moment, Lakshmi, our head of product, came up and said, there's something you really have to tell them. And so hopefully I can use these two things and just burn a minute by telling you something that is very important that Lakshmi wanted me to tell you, which is that she wanted me to emphasize that one of our main goals at the moment is building a unified and simple platform. Whether you are trying to deploy an entire application or you're just trying to get your billing data, it should be easy, it should be simple, it should be consistent. And so, hopefully I have burned a minute and we will go from here. So it has actually been quite a good day, I think, in my opinion. Do people generally agree it's a good day? Yeah? Great. So on the network services side, we heard from several customers. We also heard from Nick, who was talking about precisely what we have done in network services. We've launched HTTP 3, we've launched Quick, we've launched WebSockets via our fan-out integration, and we have reserved caching on the way as well. On the security side, we heard from Andrew. We also heard from Gannett about how they're using our security services to build their actual applications. On the security side, we heard specifically about GraphQL and the WAF being launched. We heard about how managed security services are on the way. We heard about how anti-fraud is on the way. All right, what about observability? This is a new line for us. So one of the things we heard about observability was the idea of observability-driven development, which, as far as I can tell, is just it's testing in production, but with lots of graphs to make it safe. This is a good thing, believe me. We also heard in observability about how we have the free trial of both the domain inspector and the origin inspector that is launching today. So I hope you all check that out. And finally, we also heard about, we also heard about compute. That's right, I talked about compute. The main thing we were talking about with compute was about languages. We also heard from Lakshmi about the object store, but really the main focus of that, from my perspective, was about ease of use. Right? There's a lot of focus on ease of use in compute. You can't have advanced technology available for everyone that isn't easy to use. What is the point of that? That just means no one will use it. But there was one thing that stuck out to me as something I wanted to talk about because it leads into something that I think is pretty interesting, and that was Fastly Anywhere. Now, Fastly Anywhere is interesting, right? Because when we think about an edge network is in most people's minds, we're thinking about something that is close to the users. It's very close. We're always trying to get as close, and we're talking about how close we are to the end user. But Fastly Anywhere, that's not really the entire point of Fastly Anywhere, is it? Right? When we were talking about that earlier, we were talking about how this can run in your own data center. That's not close to the user at all, right? Well, so from my perspective, that leads me to a question, which is what exactly is an edge cloud platform? What is our goal here? What are we trying to do with this? Well, it's not just that we're just trying to get close to the users. It must be something else, right? So to me, what this is actually about is about breaking out of a box. And you might expect me to say that this box is your data center or it's your core cloud provider, right? But I think it's actually somewhat more of a philosophical thing than that. Regardless of the specific technology, all of these things have locations, specific geographic locations in the world, right? If you have a DC, an actual physical data center, you have to find real estate. Which real estate, which patch of ground am I going to use to put this server on top of? If you're using the cloud, you're actually even if you're not choosing the specific area, you're choosing the availability zone, right? And you're putting it in a place, right? So when you think about the concept of serverless, it's clearly there's still a server there, right? And you know where it is. You can go find that server if you wanted to. In all these cases, you have specific geographic placement that has to be weighed and traded off and considered. And it seems to me that that is actually kind of the point of an edge network, is to get away from that idea. So a key tenet of how we build systems and the experience we strive to provide for you is that it should be locationless. It should not have a physical location associated with it. Obviously, there are physical data centers involved, but one of our main goals is for you to not have to think about them. Now, that's a pretty tall goal when you consider our other tenet of trying to make sure that our network feels like an extension of your infrastructure, an extension of like what you own and what you build on, right? It's hard to make a single product work without having to consider geography. It's far harder to make something that feels like a global network, but also feels like something that you have complete control over, especially without having the abstraction become extremely leaky, right? I think we've done a decent job of this. There are still ways to improve, and that's like one of the directions that we're heading in at the moment. But like, here's a thought about this. This concept of being locationless is pretty fascinating to me, right? The first way this comes up, of course, is like the way that everybody thinks about, which is that, you know, it's about routing your users. Please. There we go. Routing your users to our closest location, right? It's about routing your users to our closest location, making sure they get there as quickly as possible. And it seems like it's effectively as if for every individual request from every individual location simultaneously, we're effectively like running an optimization function. We're optimizing over a specific function for this request. You know, and that function might just be minimizing the function of user latency, for instance, right? But despite the fact that this is the way we always think about it, is that the only way? Is that the only thing we could do here? Well, no. I mean, it seems obvious to me that that's actually not true, because, you know, when a request needs to flow back toward your data center, we change that, right? We try to get as close to your data center as possible, and that's effectively what shielding is, right? That's the point of shielding. And so in this case, we are now minimizing the function of your data center's latency. Okay. But there's other ways to do this as well. Don't worry, I have a point. I'm going somewhere with this, right? So what if, like, you know, perhaps your user is downloading a really large file, you know, or maybe they're streaming something that's incredibly high bandwidth. Well, in that case, maybe we don't care that much about latency. Maybe the more important thing for us to care about is actually throughput, which is usually the same location, but not always, right? And so in this case, we're minimizing the function of the user's throughput. But we can get even weirder with this. We can get even stranger. And so what about this case? You know, we've been talking about edge computing for a long time and the possibility of building things that are entirely originless. They don't have an origin at all. And I think this, like, really, like, the value of this idea really comes through when you think about, like, a collaborative application of some kind. Maybe you're working on a document with teammates together. Maybe you're like making art with a collaboration of people. Well, in this case, we actually are like trying to route people as close to each other as possible. You can also imagine this in the case of like video games, right? Like trying to get people to the closest data center to all of them. So in this case, what we're actually doing is we're optimizing over the function of all of the users' individual latency, and we're summing them up, and that is what we're trying to minimize, right? Okay. Here's the point. You know, this came from Artur's deck earlier this morning, right? And like, the edge is getting more complicated. When we're talking about building full applications, entire applications at the edge, it's not just about like one function. It's about many functions and many services that go along with those functions, right? And here's the trick. For all of those things that are on there, whether it's the WAF or bot detection, traffic management, load balancing, whatever it is that you're doing, as well as your own code, there is no one location that is correct for all of them. There is no one location that is optimal for all of them. And so this leads me to the point I'm actually trying to make here. Don't worry, the black slides are intentional. Like, I want to reiterate something that I've talked about before, which is, which is that, like, when we set out to build Fastly, we went to build like the best CDN, right? But it wasn't actually for the purpose of building the best CDN. The reason that we built a CDN was because if we had come out 11 years ago and said, we're building an edge compute network, no one would have known what we were talking about. There was no basis for this. There was no way of getting people to think about it this way. We had to have a base to build these ideas on top of. And that is what we are getting to today, right? One of those core ideas is about things being locationless. So I just want to take a second and say thank you all. I think a good way to think about this is that we're trying to turn the entire globe, the entire world, into your data center. So you don't have to think about where things run. You don't think about when they run. You leave that to us. You leave us to figure out specifically what is the optimal place for every individual piece of my application. That is our goal, and I hope you'll come along on the journey to get there with us. So thank you.